Welcome to the Northern Powerhouse interview series, where we're unashamedly spreading good news by interviewing Northern businesses and their successes during the pandemic. Subscribe to be notified of new interviews or click the link in the description to take part if you'd like to be interviewed yourself in a future episode.
Today we're talking to Nick Green of Fatgreen Consulting. He's here to tell us a bit about his story his lockdown story really, and how he's ended up where he is. So welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Charlie. That's really kind of you.
Go on, you go.
Interesting journey. I was basically running an insurance business, but last year, and as I got to the beginning of this year, we'd made a lot of changes in the business. We'd hired some new people, energized the business, and really we laid the foundations for a really strong 2020. And by about this time last year, I was feeling pretty good about the business. I was looking forward to a really good 2020. And I remember, clear as day, Charlie, I went away for Christmas last year, feeling really happy and, thinking, right, we'll get a bit of a rest, we'll come back, we'll throw ourselves into 2020, we'll really go for it. And that was until January this year, when we had our monthly management meeting in London, and at which point the head of legal counsel came into the room and asked everyone in the room to sign a non-disclosure. So of course that got everyone thinking what was about to come. And soon after that, the head of the business, UK business, came in and announced a complete countrywide corporate restructure, where the business model was completely changed, or not completely changed, but certainly finessed and caressed. But as a byproduct of that, I ended up leaving the business because that's just corporate life for you, isn't it? But these things happen. So that's why I found myself in January this year, obviously pre-COVID, back in the days when life seemed somewhat more normal than it does today.
These things happen in person, yeah,
exactly. And then I was then, for the first 6 months of this year, I was then in a position where we were winding down the business, making sure the staff were looked after, making sure there was a nice, clean exit and handover of the business. So that was that. But during that period, I started thinking about, what the future might look like and what we might want to do with the future and how we could build a business. And during my last role, I was in regular contact with financial advisors and brokers in the north of England. And one of the areas which a lot of these people wanted to do more business in was providing business protection solutions to companies.
Sure.
But in reality, when I looked at the numbers coming in terms of the revenue being generated on the back of brokers selling business protection, I realized that the number of people who were actually buying business protection, in terms of corporates buying business protection, was actually very low. So I myself and my team, trying to work out why this was the case. And then I had a bit of a light bulb moment where I realized that so many people who go into the financial services industry do so from perhaps a different background than myself. Many of them, for example, have started their careers selling real estate, property. And then as they've progressed, some have either stayed selling real estate, or others have moved from that into financial services, often selling mortgages and then life insurance on the back of that. And then over time, the people who decided to stay in the industry, make a long-term career of it, then took their professional exams, enabling them to sell ISAs and pensions, etc. But the one thing which the one commonality that I saw across this group of people was that so many of them, their experience had been about selling to individuals. So selling them real estate, selling them a mortgage, selling them a life insurance policy, selling them an ISA or pension. But very few of them had actually had a strong corporate background before this.
Yes.
And I think when it comes to providing business protection solutions, the approach that we use when we're presenting a problem and a solution to corporate is very different to when you're selling to an individual. But because I have a very strong corporate background, my wife was previously an M&A and IPO investment banker, dealing with some very complex company structures. I realized that, perhaps we have a slightly different angle to bring to the table. So effectively, this is where I got thinking about what the future might look like. I realized that there's a niche in the marketplace to set up a really focused business which specializes in providing business protection solutions to corporates. And I felt that we had an angle because myself and my other two business partners have all had experience of building and running businesses, so we can relate to the kind of issues facing chairmen, CEOs, and other types of people. But by the same token, because we have a background in professional services where we've only ever dealt with corporates, I just feel that our DNA and our experiences are perfectly positioned to help us to work with and in partnership with business leaders around the UK. So that was
when we had our initial conversation. I know when we were talking about, and I, ignorant business rugby background, I didn't understand exactly what it was business protection was.
Yeah.
And the way you explained it to me, it seems something that seems so. I don't know why anyone would go into business without it, because inevitably, as with business growth and as business coaches, and inevitably businesses grow and then eventually they decline or something goes wrong, and there's always a road bump.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's in a small mode that someone injures themselves or someone can't work for a while, they have something that way, or in a much larger case, a bereavement, death in the business, and that sort of thing. It can cause untold amounts of stress, and the way you explained what it was you did, I think, was really helpful to me. And I just didn't know if you want to sort of go over, sort of re-explain it, because I do think something's brilliant. Part
of the reason why business protection resonates with me, because I say I've owned my own business since I was 32. And I've seen what happens to business owners. That certainly, in particular, the amount of stress which they're placed under. And I look back at my own life, Charlie, and I read, my father died when he was 38 from a heart attack when I was 10 years old. A very close family member last year was diagnosed with cancer. So I realized that life can change, and when it does change, it often changes on a dime, and it often changes when you least expect it to change. So I kind of work by the mantra that I think it's important to be prepared for life's eventualities or unexpected challenges. And I think I'm not on a moral crusade, but I do think it's important to educate business leaders that there are solutions in place which would help them to deal with an unexpected or unforeseen crisis. So the way that we approach business is really to work with clients. The first stage is to start by presenting what we call a business review. So what we're looking for is, what are the risks, what are the potential threats facing a business in the future? What would the financial liabilities be with that? And then once we have a clear picture of, what we perceive the future risks to be, the future financial liabilities to be, then we start to package and structure solutions around those issues, where that hopefully addresses and provides protection blanket for those organizations. But questions that we might ask might be, for example, so you've got a successful business, you've worked really hard to build it to this stage, you and maybe 2 or 3 or 4 other partners. You're now turning over anything from £1.5 million up to £10 million a year, and you've got maybe a team of 20, 30 people. Within the business, there are 3 shareholders. My question to you then would be, well, God forbid you had a car accident and killed, or you were diagnosed with a critical illness. What would happen to the stock? Where would the stock and where would the shares go to? And 9 times out of 10, unless a cross-option agreement has been put in place, where everyone's agreed to the value of the stock, in 9 times out of 10, the stock will go to the spouse of the deceased. Now, what we see initially is that is fine, but over time, once the dust has settled a bit, what often happens is that the spouse wants to become involved in the business and control. So they'll expect a seat at the board, they expect to be involved in decision making in the business, and eventually the other directors start, to get irritated in many cases by this, because the spouse, hasn't got the insight or the judgment of the business, but ultimately wants to take a bonus or a dividend at the end of the year and wants to be actively involved. So the issue then becomes, well, could we buy the stock of the spouse in order for us to regain control of our business. For a lot of SMEs, managing cash flow is a perennial problem. It's a perennial challenge. And the cost of buying out stock, can be quite a significant figure. It can easily reach into seven figures, depending on the valuation of the business. So the challenge then becomes, well, even if we could get the spouse to agree to sell the business, do we have access to capital to buy the stock off the spouse, or could we structure a deal, perhaps where we pay the spouse over a period of years? But again, all of this requires agreement to be reached. And what I experienced in my own life is that when you lose somebody, as I did my father, the amount of stress that places the spouse under is enormous. And it's one that you can only understand and appreciate if you've been in that situation. But the one thing I learned is that when people are under that amount of pressure and stress, they're not thinking clearly, and it's very difficult for them it's very difficult to get them to appreciate the magnitude of these kind of decisions.
Yeah, I mean that's what hit me with it when you were talking about this, because obviously you're in such a hard place in that the spouse has lost a husband. So say it's a man doing it, because that's the spouse has lost a husband. The business partners have lost their business partner, and if he was in a key role, they haven't got, so they need to recruit to replace him, even though they personally are feeling lost. And you're expecting some real clarity of thinking and good decisions to be made in a situation where that's nigh on impossible. Because just the amount of emotion revolving around that thing was huge. And obviously where you guys come in then is sort of, as you explained it to me, it's providing that clarity of thinking, making those decisions ahead of time. And obviously you're coming on to now exactly how it works, but that's the way to me, really struck to me, because as you say, when you've been through that situation, how hard it is to make those decisions clearly.
It's almost impossible, I think, because it is, as you say, it is an emotional roller coaster. Other issues as well. I mean, sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where someone's passed away sadly, or they've become diagnosed with critical illness. The question then becomes, well, for the remaining shareholders, how do they survive? How does the business cope going forward? Now, in many circumstances, what is a typical business structure? You may have, say, one shareholder who is what I call the creator of the ideas, the brains behind the business. They've come up with the idea of the product. Then often you'll have another who is, say, the operational specialist. So they're particularly adept at finance, at compliance, legality, etc., and corporate governance. And then the final person is, the sales, the business development, the marketing side of the business. And the question becomes, well, if for example, the COO, suddenly dies or becomes critically ill, the other two partners may want to continue the business, but who is going to fill the shoes of that person? Because you can bet your bottom dollar that the other two people are absolutely stretched to the limit anyway, and which is often the way in running. A business. Other questions such as are, well, how is it going to impact revenue? And many people say, well, I don't think it would impact revenue if we lost a person in the business, in which case it kind of begs the question, well, what are they doing for the business anyway? So 9 times out of 10, it does have a major impact on revenue. How are staff going to feel if one of the partners suddenly, passes away? And I know from my prior experience of running businesses and working with businesses, staff can get very, very nervous quite quickly unless they can see a really clearly defined contingency plan in place. If, for example, the business has a loan against it, many SMEs do, or if it has an investor, a significant investor. When you think about how lenders and investors look at businesses, it's not just, well, how good is the product? Is it a well-run business? But they're also looking at the people behind the business, and saying, well, what happens if you take out, one of the key people in rugby? What happens if you lose your scrum half? The ability to coordinate between the forwards and the backs suddenly is significantly diluted. So all of these issues have an enormous impact on the success of business, and unless the business has a clearly defined contingency plan, which is thought, it's well costed and it's defined, which enables them to then go to investors or clients or staff and say, look, this has happened, but don't worry, don't panic. We've got a plan in place. Unless they're in that position, the reality is a lot of them find themselves in a very, very difficult position And sadly, whether we like it or not, a huge percentage of businesses, something like 50 to 60% of SMEs who lose a key person fold within 1 year.
Yeah, and obviously that's a horrendous thing to have to deal with on top of the fact you've just lost someone in your life, on top of everything else that's going on. And obviously, both of us are in the kind of game where we're fighting businesses going under as hard as we can. We want to keep people going. So, I mean, yours is a really interesting story, Nick, because a lot of people we speak to, it's like, we had to make this change back in March because of COVID. And this has affected me this way, that's gone this way.
Yeah.
Whereas yours is almost flipped on its head in that the change happened for you before COVID was, I mean, it was rattling around in January, obviously, but in terms of this country, it hit in March with the lockdown and everything. You'd already kind of, were winding down the one business and starting thinking about the next one even then.
Yeah.
And almost COVID itself is highlighting, because like I said, we're talking in abstract here about people, potentially sort of, find themselves in horrible situations and people dying and, leaving companies in bad places. And we're in the middle of a pandemic where many people with, and let's face it, COVID opens up holes that are already there. And there's a lot of people running businesses who aren't the healthiest, they're already stressed and everything else. So, it's taken its toll on business that way. And here you are saying, look, you need to have this contingency plan in place. So it's not that COVID's making your business, it's just almost highlighting the need for it.
Yeah, totally.
So I mean, you found yourself in a really almost ideally placed in terms of people should sit there and say, do you know what, actually, we, as human beings, like I say, most people buy a burglar alarm after they've been burgled.
Yeah.
And it's trying to get ahead of them, I suppose. So you're kind of ideally placed to do that.
I think you're right, Charlie. I mean, look, COVID, in my view, COVID has been a massive wake-up call for us all. It's proved to us that you just, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, you just don't know what's around the corner in life. Yeah. And my own experience in life is that when things are going right, that's when I start to worry.
Yeah.
I'm always sort of wondering, well, what next is going to happen? But, in my career, I lived in Hong Kong for 18 years. And, I lived and worked through the SARS outbreak in Hong Kong. I lived and worked through the 9/11 event where the Twin Towers were sadly going down. I've experienced the death of my father, diagnosed with cancer with a very close family member last year. So it's proved to me that, life is never a consistent, smooth path. There are always shocks around the corner. And I think, businesses who don't take time to reflect and reassess where they are and assess what they've got, but also make sure that they're protected by not going through that process or that road of exploration, they're leaving themselves very, very exposed. So our objective, it's not a moral crusade, but it's really one just to say, look, this has been our life experiences. Things can happen to your business. It often happens when you least expect it. Make sure you've taken the necessary level of protection to protect your businesses and your spouse and your loved ones.
No, exactly that. No, I think, like you say, it's something that, I'm in a vaguely unique position in that I'm learning an awful lot about business and what businesses do and what they are. And I think we had the conversation that really kind of highlighted to me, it's, you have children, you write a will because you want to make sure that everything's going in the right place in terms of what happens to your assets. But your company is a huge asset, and it's essentially providing the same level of protection and being responsible for what happens afterwards. And I think you've timed this well, Nick. But what's the future for Fatgreen? What's it looking like? Years from now, where are we?
So the future is bright. The future is green. We're feeling very excited about the future, Charlie. What is very apparent to me is that, as I said, COVID has been a wake-up call for a lot of people. A lot of people have taken a long, hard look at where they are and what they've got. And I think it's forced people to reassess their priorities in life. It's forced people to reassess what's important. By default, we find ourselves in a situation where we're launching this business to help protect businesses. And so far, the feedback we've had has been extremely positive and very, very receptive, because I think people ultimately do understand the need for this. We are, as a company based in New York, as a Northerner myself, but someone who's lived internationally and worked in London as well, we're talking at the moment to a number of different companies, a number of SMEs, up and down the country. So I'm feeling pretty positive about the future. I never thought I'd be saying that in an environment such as this, but I'm an opportunist at heart, Charlie, and I think that there are always opportunities around in life. So yeah, feeling really positive about the future, and just want to position Fatgreen as the UK's #1 leading business protection specialist firm within 2 to 3 years from now.
Lovely, love a bit of ambition.
Bit of hunger, bit of drive.
Yeah, good man. Anything you see getting in the way of that, other than COVID sort of rearing its head? Is any other sort of clouds you can see on the horizon, or all looking good?
I think the big unknown for many people in business is, how is Brexit going to impact? And I've listened to both sides of the argument. There have been some extremely compelling cases put forward from pro-Brexiteers and anti-Brexiteers. I don't think anybody actually knows. I don't think anybody has a crystal ball and can tell you exactly what's going to happen in the future. So my approach to Brexit is just to embrace it. The decision has been made. We now need to get on and make sure we get the best outcome for UK PLC, and make sure that we position ourselves to capitalise on any opportunities which may come along, which I'm sure there will be.
No, and that's it. And it's sort of learning the lessons almost from what's happened with COVID, and sort of, if you could pull one thing out of what you did, if you could do one thing sooner and apply it going forward, what would that sort of your key to getting through everything that we're going through right now, and like you say, will undoubtedly will turn up in the future? Yeah,
as I say, Charlie, my DNA is my glass is always half full. I'm an opportunist by heart, and I believe life is full of opportunities. I think so much of it is about keeping an open mind to opportunities. And I'm not saying I'm any better or any worse than anybody else, but that's just the mantra by which my guiding light, so to say.
Yeah, get up and keep on going. Perfect.
Exactly. When you
Top man, Nick, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Charlie.
I got to get a rugby pun in there somewhere.
Thanks for watching. What was your takeaway from today's interview? Please post it in the comments below, and subscribe for all our upcoming videos, or click for the next video here.